Today I have a super fun project for you. I have collaborated with Jessica over at the Confetti Bar to bring you this really sweet vinyl and confetti heart garland. All it takes is some vinyl, a handful of gorgeous confetti, and your sewing machine, and you will have this whipped up in no time. So this project is so much fun and has so many possibilities to it. I did hearts because we're getting close to Valentine's Day, but I think it'd be really adorable if you did a small child's name. How cute would this be in a nursery? Or of course you could pick any other number of holidays to create it for. Hi, my name is Laura Kasowitz. I am the owner of Hartford Stitch, a sewing school for kids and adults right outside Hartford, Connecticut. I can also teach you online through my video workshops, Kids Learn to Sew e-course, and of course our YouTube tutorials. So it is a beginner tutorial. You don't need to have that many skills. However, I assume that you're not a brand new sewer. There's a couple things you need to know. You need to know how to wind a bobbin and thread your machine. You need to know basic sewing skills like sewing in a straight line, sewing a curved line, backstitching, and pivoting or turning corners. If you're not familiar with those or you need a refresher, check out one of our video workshops. I'll put the link down below in the description. If this is your first time sewing with vinyl, make sure to check out our All About Sewing with Vinyl video that we released last week, where we go into all the details about how to buy it, how to prep it, and how to sew it. So if you like what you see today, if you love the project, if you find something valuable, please give me a thumbs up, hit subscribe, and make sure to turn on notifications because we have another vinyl and confetti project coming for you next week. And stay tuned to the end because even though I have been sewing for a very long time, I make mistakes too, and there were a couple bloopers while I was sewing this project. All right, so the very first thing you're going to need are all your materials and tools. So let's go over what you need for that.
The first thing you're going to want to get is your vinyl. So this is 12 gauge vinyl, and gauge refers to the thickness. And in our previous video all about sewing with vinyl, we go through all of those details. But I have a 1/4 yard of that. So that's 9 inches from the bottom cut edge to the top cut edge by the width of the fabric, if you will, by the width of the vinyl. You're also going to want, of course, your confetti. So the smaller package in the Confetti Bar is more than enough. I made Jessica at the Confetti Bar a heart garland as well and used this really fun pink confetti. And you can see I still have a little bit left, but today I am going to be using this one. You're also going to want a spool of thread and a bobbin, and I'm just using regular all-purpose thread. So I am doing hearts for my garland, so I have templates in 3 different sizes just cut out of computer paper. One thing to keep in mind when you trace out your templates is that we are going to trace this shape onto the vinyl and then sew on that line. So, you know, normally if you're working with patterns and fabric, you trace something out and then you cut on that line, and so when you sew it, it becomes a little bit smaller. But when we cut our vinyl, it's actually going to become a little bit bigger because we're going to sew on this line. Just something to keep in mind when you're making your template size. And then lastly, to hang the garland, you're going to want craft floss. Craft floss is a lot like pearl cotton. It may actually just be the same thing with different names, I don't know. But you'll see that craft floss is a little thick and doesn't come untwisted. So I'm rolling it back and forth and you're not getting little threads. You can use just regular 6-strand embroidery thread as well, but that is meant to come apart, so you'll start to get those little frays at the end. Honestly, it doesn't really matter. I just kind of like the consistent look of craft floss, but whatever you have on hand works, and you're going to want about 1 skein of that. The 1 skein will get you a couple garlands. All right, so for tools, you're going to want your paper scissors because, of course, we don't cut our vinyl with our fabric scissors. And you'll also want a pair of thread snips for trimming your threads. You're going to want a dry erase marker. So this is what we use to trace that pattern onto the vinyl because we can wipe it away when we're done. Of course, I love my clear grid ruler, but any ruler will work. We're just going to use it to measure out our hanging thread. Clips. We went over this in that very first video, but clips won't put holes in the vinyl when you're holding the pieces of vinyl together, so they're really helpful. If you don't have quilter's clips, binder clips will work, and in a pinch you can even use a paper clip, though it doesn't hold it quite as well. And then you'll want a hand sewing needle. So this hand sewing needle, I imagine it's a crewel needle. I'm not actually 100% sure, but you'll see that it has a really big eye and it's really sturdy. You don't want a needle that's going to bend easily because we have to punch it through that vinyl. And you want the big eye so we can get the craft floss through it. And then last but not least, of course, you're going to want your sewing machine. So I already have my sewing machine prepped with my paper and my Teflon foot. These are just 2 of those things we talked about in that All About Sewing Vinyl video that help you kind of move the vinyl through. Your sewing machine may not need it, but if it does, now's a good time to get that all set up. All right, so take a moment, gather your tools and your materials, and let's start sewing. So you're gonna want your vinyl, You're going to want your heart patterns, your paper scissors, your dry erase marker, and your clips. You're going to start by folding your vinyl in half so that's 2 layers so that we can cut out 2 pieces at a time. And I want to have 1 big heart and then 2 of each of my middle and my small hearts. So I'm going to lay them out on my vinyl so that I can do that. Now, remember, we're cutting out our seam allowance or that extra fabric outside of our stitching line after we sew. So you don't want to put your hearts up like this. You don't want to put one piece way up at the top. You want to make sure that there is a little bit of room around each piece. All right, so I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to trace my hearts. Now is a good time for you to do that as well. Just don't cut anything yet. You need to leave a gap to put in your confetti. So I always like to leave a gap where it's the straightest. I wouldn't want to leave it on the top of a curve. So I'm just going to erase a little bit of the bottom of each side. Now you want to make sure you leave enough room that you can get in there and stuff it. All right, then you're going to want to go and cut big chunks. Remember, don't cut too close to any one side or another, but the big chunks are going to make it so much easier for you to sew all the way around. And then you can put your clips on all of the pieces. So let's take a quick walk around the heart so we can figure out exactly how we're sewing it before we head over to the sewing machine. So a sewing walk is something I love to do with my kid students, but it really is good for adult students too. Gap behind our presser foot. We're gonna do our back stitch, so go forward, go back, head down to the corner and do our turn. Turn at this corner, work your way around this curve, and go back and back stitch. And that's all there is to it. All right, so before we get going, make sure that you increase your stitch length just a little bit. Usually I keep mine between 2 and 3. And for this, I'm just going like a notch above 3. That longer stitch length will just help keep the vinyl from getting too perforated when you sew. All right, so we're gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna start with this one. I'm gonna speed it up a little bit, but I'm gonna do that exact same plan that we talked about before. All right, so now you're gonna take one and you wanna just rub your finger and you can wipe off all that dry erase marker. And then you can go and trim it around about 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, all the way around. Just take your time to try to make your lines as smooth as possible. All right, so now is a good time for you to pause and go ahead and do that with all of your hearts. All right, here comes the fun part, the confetti. So you want to take out a handful of confetti. Just lean into the fact it's going to get everywhere. It's kind of fun. You want to find the gap that you left, open that up, and then just start filling it up. Now, I have tried every which way, and I have found that the best thing really is just to kind of shove in handfuls and then use a pencil eraser to kind of spread it out to wherever you need it to be. So I'm going to go ahead and, I just dumped it all out. I'm going to go ahead and speed this all up, and now is a good time for you to pause and do the same. And once your confetti is everywhere you want it to be, we're gonna head back to your sewing machine. Okay, so you have everything stuffed, and now it's time to close it up. So you're just gonna go over to your sewing machine, start a little bit before the end of your back stitch, go forward, go back, sew the gap shut, and back stitch down below as well. You're gonna do that with all of them, and I will meet you over with your floss when you are done. All right, you're almost there. So let's get all these hearts on the string now. You're going to want your craft thread, your hand needle, your scissors, your hearts, and a ruler. So the first thing you want to do is cut what we're going to call the hanging thread. So this is the thread that's going to go along the top. And I usually cut mine about 4 feet, 48 inches, but of course make it fit for wherever you plan to hang it. And now we're going to cut the drop threads. So if this is the heart and the hanging thread is up here, that's the little thread that's going to connect the heart to the hanging thread. And you want these to be about 6 to 8 inches long. That might seem really long, but we can always trim off the extra later. And you want one for each of your hearts. So I'm going to go ahead and cut 5. All right, so take your hanging thread and you're roughly going to find the center. It doesn't have to be perfect. We can always move things around afterwards, but you roughly want to start in the center. You're going to take one of your drop threads and you're going to take your biggest heart or whichever heart you want in the middle. Now, if you know anything about macrame, this is much like making a lark knot. So you're going to fold one drop thread in half, so 2 ends are down there and the loop is up at the top. And you're going to place that underneath the rough center of your hanging thread, about halfway. Then you're going to take these 2 ends and you're going to go through the loop. All right, so see how that hanging thread is kind of stuck in the middle there? And then pull it tight-ish. It doesn't have to be super tight. And then you have one lark knot, one drop thread done. After you have the first one done, you're going to take your needle, thread the eye of the needle with just one thread end. Take your big heart, whichever one's gonna go in the center, and you're gonna push that needle through the top center. Now it doesn't matter if you're in the seam allowance or in the heart itself, just pull it through so that thread end comes out, and then you can pull that off and go back and thread the other thread end and go through that same hole or as close to it as you can get and pull that thread end out, okay? So you can fuss with these a little bit, but I wouldn't worry too much now. We're gonna get all of our hearts on like this, and then we'll go through and figure out exactly where they should be and exactly how long they should be. So I'm gonna speed up and do the rest of these, so now is a good time for you to pause and do the same yourself. All right, so once you have all of your hearts threaded onto their drop strings, you can take a moment and sort of play with it to see how far down you want them to drop, how far apart you want them to be, and these will continue to slide on the strings even after you've tied it off. All right, so I think this looks good for me, which means now I'm just gonna go and tie knots in each of these. So once you know where you want it to be, take your two ends, make a loop and pull the thread through, and if you have to shorten it in order to make the knot, that's okay. Just make sure your knot goes where you want it to, so like down at the end there. Pull it tight, and then you can pull it tight up against it. So I'm gonna go through and do that with all of mine. Now is a great time for you to pause and do the same. You are done, and I am sure it looks amazing. Jessica at the Confetti Bar and I would love to see your creations. I am particularly interested in which confetti you purchased. So please make sure to tag us at Hartford Stitch and at the Confetti Bar. So if you had any issues sewing this, know that you are in good company. Like I said in the beginning, I had some issues while I was sewing it as well. So make sure to keep on watching so you can see all of my bloopers. If you like the project, if you like the video, please give me a thumbs up, hit subscribe, and then turn on your notifications because like I said, we have another project with confetti and vinyl coming at you next week. Thank you again for joining me, and if you are looking for some more vinyl inspiration, check out this video and that video. Happy stitching!